in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Today we should be getting back at the local, where is that coming from? Logical fallacies. That's alright, Jules, it's no problem. Don't worry about it. It's the 4th of July 2015. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur Event. I'm your host, Walter, coming to you from the Netherlands. Today we will be going back to the logical fallacies. Well, maybe I should do that like once a year or so. Just, it's a nice introduction to the trivium. Usually you would start with grammar, but since the logical fallacies are more fun, it's a good way to get people interested in the whole trivium thing. And we did like 4 or 5 last week. Alright, thanks Jules. That's awesome. And we were at appeal to consequences of a belief. However, before we get there, I want to get my pages in order. Welcome everybody in the chat room. Anouk Nimos, CH2Hell, I think, or CFR2Hell. Yeah, CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. Did you also know there's an ECFR, especially for Europe? You know, Alan Watt says that the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which is based in London, Chatham House, the same address as the government, is the mother of these organizations, and they have them all over the place, especially of course in Commonwealth countries like Australia. But you know, all of Europe has one too, the European Council on Foreign Relations. Right, you don't hear a lot, actually. I've never heard anybody speak about the British Empire. You know, what is it? Do people think that it's dead? It doesn't exist anymore? I doubt that very much, you know. It's like they were so powerful that that's a position you don't give away. You know, you hear that story about who was it, Rockefeller, right? Who managed to quote-unquote trick the people and took hold of London's economics. Right? I tell you, that's utter nonsense. All right, the Queen, who owned it up to then, would have him assassinated if that were true. Now, but that's not the case, which means they're working together, right? That's a most strong argument. It's quite simple, actually. So, anyway, let's get into appeal to consequences of a belief. Oh, this is, there are six following patterns. Whoops. Then the description of an appeal to consequences of a belief. By the way, if you have any questions, you can go to ucy.tv, find the chat link, get into the chat room, ucyradio.chatango.com, and there you can post any questions. It doesn't have to be on topic as far as I'm concerned. If you do so, please type them in capital letters so they will more easily be spotted by me. I try to keep an eye on both pages here, the one with the fallacies and the chat room. Alright, what did I say? Welcome everybody in the chat room, right? Who's there? Annika Maus, CFR to Hell, Cracker, Dan, Doc, Jules, Otto von Bolschwing, Poppa, Rhodes, and Tomato. Welcome everybody. I'm kind of surprised there's so many people here on Independence Day. I figured you'd all be out and about, you know. Anyway, the description of an appeal to consequence of a belief is as follows. It comes in the following pattern. 1. X is true because people did not accept X as being true. I'm missing a word here. X is true because if people did not accept X as being true, then there would be negative consequences. Alright, so it doesn't, the thing that should stand out to you here is that it doesn't matter if there's negative consequences or not. A thing is true or it is not. Right? If it's not true and it has negative consequences, well, so be it. Number 2, X is false because if people did not accept X as being false, then there would be negative consequences. Right? Same argument. 3, X is true because accepting that X is true has positive consequences. Alright? Doesn't make sense, right? Why would you just accept something as being true because it has positive consequences? Goes in the other way around also. 4, X is false because accepting that X is false has positive consequences. 5, I wish that X were true, therefore X is true. This is known as wishful thinking, and that also goes the other way around. I wish X were false, therefore X is false. This is also known as wishful thinking. This line of reasoning is fallacious because the consequences of a belief have no bearing on whether the belief is true or false. For example, if someone were to say, if 16-headed purple unicorns don't exist, then I would be miserable, so they must exist. It would be clear that this would not be a good line of reasoning. Yeah. It is important to note that the consequences in question are the consequences that stem from the belief. It is important to distinguish between a rational reason to believe and then it says brackets open evidence, close, and the prudential reason to believe. It has to do with motivation. A rational reason to believe is evidence that objectively and logically supports the claim. Prudential reason to believe is a reason to accept the belief because of some external factor, such as fear, a threat, or a benefit or harm that may stem from the belief. That is relevant to what a person values, but is not relevant to the truth or falsity of the claim. The nature of the fallacy is especially clear in the case of wishful thinking. Obviously, merely wishing that something is true does not make it true. Right? I think what comes to my mind here is the claim that a lot of New Agers will make. Well, you create your own reality. No. It doesn't have to be wishful thinking. You can't think reality into existence. You can't wish it into existence. You can't want it into existence. You can't work it into existence. It was long there before you even were an idea in your mother's mind. This fallacy differs from the appeal to belief fallacy in that appeal to belief involves taking a claim that most people believe that X is true to be evidence for X being true, right? So there's a big difference between those two. Here are some examples of appeal to consequences of a belief. 1. God must exist. If God did not exist, then all basis for morality would be lost and the world would be a horrible place. Right? This is a claim made by somebody who in their metaphysics has God in there. Whichever one of the thousands or even millions, if you include Indian mythology, he's picked from. 2. It can never happen to me. If I believed it could, I could never sleep soundly at night. And so it's appeal, he's fearful of something happening. Therefore they try to block it out. Just deny it. 3. I don't think that there will be a nuclear war. If I believed that, I wouldn't be able to get up in the morning. I mean, how depressing. Right? More fear. 4. I acknowledge that I have no argument for the existence of God. Well, that's poor. Even I can come up with arguments. Being not a theist, but also not an atheist. 4. I acknowledge that I have no argument for the existence of God. However, I have a great desire for God to exist and for there to be an afterlife. Therefore, I accept that God exists. Well, that's very poor, isn't it? That's not a good reason to believe in God. It's totally non-based. And you accepting that God exists does not create God in itself. Alright, so that was consequences to belief. Next one is important, appeal to emotion. This is a lot used in advertisements. People are being appealed to via their emotions. First of all, you're ugly, of course. And that's why you need makeup and things like that. An appeal to emotion is a fallacy with the following structure. Why do I say that? Well, you're ugly, of course. That's why you need makeup. Well, you have to turn that around, you know? The advertisements for makeup have as a basis that you feel ugly and therefore you need these makeup thingies, right? An appeal to emotion is a fallacy with the following structure. 1. Favorable emotions are associated with X. 2. Therefore X is true. This fallacy is committed when someone manipulates people's emotions in order to get them to accept a claim as being true. Well, I would say that it's not only manipulating emotions, it's using the emotions that are already there to make people come to certain conclusions or even get them to act. Like buy a new car or buy this beer or whatever. More formally, this sort of reasoning involves the substitution of various means of producing strong emotions in place of evidence for a claim. If the favorable emotions associated with X influence the person to accept X as true because they feel good about X, then they have fallen prey to the fallacy. And by the way, also notice that in the word emotion, there is the word motion there. It means to go somewhere, to be in motion, right? This sort of reasoning is very common in politics, as it serves as the basis for a large portion of, not as, that should say and. Let's try this again. This sort of reasoning is very common in politics, and it serves as the basis for a large portion of modern advertising. Most political speeches are aimed at generating feelings in people so that these feelings will get them to vote or act a certain way. In the case of advertising, the commercials are aimed at evoking emotions that will influence people to buy certain products. In most cases, such speeches and commercials are notoriously free of real evidence. This sort of reasoning is quite evidently fallacious. It is fallacious because using various tactics to incite emotions in people does not serve as evidence for a claim. For example, if a person were able to inspire in a person an incredible hatred of the claim that 1 and 1 equals 2, and then inspired the person to love the claim that 1 and 1 equals 3, it would hardly follow that the claim 1 and 1 equals 3 would be adequately supported. It should be noted that in many cases it is not particularly obvious that the person committing the fallacy is attempting to support a claim. In many cases, the user of the fallacy will appear to be attempting to move people to take an action, such as buying a product or fighting a war. However, it is possible to determine what sort of claim the person is actually attempting to support. In such cases, one needs to ask, what sort of claim is this person attempting to get people to accept and act on? Determining this claim might take some work. However, in many cases it will be quite evident. For example, if a political leader is attempting to convince followers to participate in certain acts of violence by the use of hate speech, that's newspeak, guys, hate speech. Then her claim would be, you should participate in these acts of violence. In this case, the evidence would be the hatred invoked in the followers. This hatred would serve to make them favorable, inclined towards the claim that they should engage in acts of violence. As another example, a beer commercial might show happy, scantily clad men and women prancing about a beach, guzzling beer. In this case, the claim would be, you should buy this beer. The evidence would be the excitement evoked by seeing the beautiful people guzzling the beer. In all fairness, it must be noted that the use of tactics to inspire emotion is an important skill. Without an appeal to people's emotions, it is often difficult to get them to take action or to perform at their best. For example, no good coach presents her team with syllogisms before the big game. Instead, she inspires them with emotional terms and attempts to fire them up. There is nothing inherently wrong with this. However, it is not any acceptable form of argumentation. As long as one is able to clearly distinguish between what inspires emotion and what justifies a claim, one is unlikely to fall prey to this fallacy. As a final point, in many cases it will be difficult to distinguish an appeal to emotion from some other fallacies, and in many cases multiple fallacies may be committed. For example, many ad hominems will be similar to appeals to emotion, and in some cases both fallacies will be committed. As an example, a leader might attempt to invoke a hatred of a person to inspire followers to accept that they should reject her claims. Wait a minute, I don't get that sentence. Let's try this again. As an example, a leader might attempt to invoke hatred of a person to inspire followers to accept that they should reject claims. Right? So that would be the claims of the one that the leader is trying to invoke hatred upon. The same attack could function as an appeal to emotion and a personal attack, ad hominem. In the first case, the attack would be aimed at making the followers feel very favorable about rejecting her claims. In the second case, the attack would be aimed at making the followers reject the person's claims because of some perceived or imagined defect in her character. This fallacy is related to appeal to popularity. Despite the differences between these two fallacies, they are both united by the fact that they involve appeals to emotions. Yeah, there's one that is also known by most people, ad baculum, right? Ad baculum. It's like, believe this or I'll hit you over the head with a bat, right? It's trying to get you to fear, right? So that's also linked to appeal to emotion. There are more fallacies which would fall under the umbrella of appeal to emotion. In both cases, the fallacies aim at getting people to accept claims based on how they or others feel about the claims and not based on evidence for the claims. Another way to look at these two fallacies, appeal to popularity and appeal to emotion, is as follows. Appeal to popularity, 1. Most people approve of X. 2. So I should approve of X too. 3. Since I approve of X, X must be true. I hope you all understand how nonsensical this is, right? First of all, if most people approve of X, doesn't mean that X is true. Right? A lot of people can be wrong about something. I mean, I especially, have in real life, IRL, experience in this field. Because of my steel education, I knew that these towers were not coming down because planes did or did not fly into them. And you can fly 2 planes into it and it would still stand. 2 planes each. But when I talk to other people about this, they wouldn't think like that. They would think, well, what the mainstream media says is true. These 110, which is another 11 by the way, story buildings came down because an airplane flew into it. And they didn't base that claim on any evidence. Most of them just accepted that because most people do. Then the next step 2 is one is most people approve of X, then 2. So I should approve of X too. Well, that's insane, isn't it? Can't you decide for yourself what you approve or not? Then 3, since I approve of X, X must be true. That leap is so unimaginably big, it's insane. Just because you approve of something doesn't mean that it must be true. Alright, that's appeal to popularity. Appeal to emotion. 1, I approve of X. 2, therefore X is true. We just did that. On this view, in an appeal to popularity, the claim is accepted because most people approve of the claim. In the case of an appeal to emotion, the claim is accepted because the individual approves of the claim because the emotion of approval he feels in regards to the claim. Alright. I'm going to skip the examples for appeal to emotion. And this one is not so difficult that you can make up your own examples. Next is appeal to fear. Now also known as scare tactics. Appeal to force, and the Latin name is ad baculum. Description of appeal to fear. The appeal to fear is a fallacy with the following pattern. 1. Why is presented a claim that is intended to produce fear. 2. Therefore claim X is true, a claim that is generally, but need not be, related to Y in some manner. Right. This line of reasoning is fallacious because creating fear in people does not constitute evidence for a claim. It is important to distinguish between a rational reason to believe and a prudential reason to believe. A rational reason to believe is evidence that objectively and logically supports the claim. We talked about this when we started. A prudent reason to believe is a reason to accept the belief because of some external factor, such as fear, a threat, or a benefit or harm that may stem from the belief, that is relevant to what a person values, but is not relevant to the truth or falsity of the claim. For example, it might be prudent to not fail the son of your department chairperson because you fear he will make your life tough for you. However, this does not provide evidence for the claim that the son deserves to pass the class. right? Some of you may have heard this example, like maybe a year ago or so, we gave an example. It goes something like this, and that's what the last paragraph was referring to. You know, Professor Smith, I really need to get an A in this class. I'd like to stop by during your office hours later to discuss my grade. I'll be in your buildings anyways, visiting my father. He's your dean, by the way. I'll see you later. Right? Somebody comes up with that kind of tactics. You already know that he's trying to influence you. Yeah. Nothing to do with the stuff delivered by him to Professor Smith, but to do with the relationships that exist. 2. I don't think a Red Ryder BB rifle would make a good present for you. They are very dangerous, and you'll put your eye out. Now, don't you agree that you should think of another gift idea? Yeah, these Red Ryder BB rifles are really dangerous, you know. They all of a sudden, out of themselves, they start shooting, right? You could tell sometimes these arguments. Are picked for a certain reason. You must believe that God exists. Again, the God thing. After all, if you do not accept the existence of God, then you will face the horrors of hell. Right? That's appeal to fear. Right? It's amazing, right? Because if you ask them, well, how do you know hell exists? Well, there's a heaven where God is, and there's a hell where, you know, all the bad people go. It's circular reasoning, you see? Because without their God, there would be no hell. 4. You shouldn't say such things against multiculturalism. If the chair heard what you were saying, you would never receive tenure. So you had just better learn to accept that it is simply wrong to speak out against it. Right? It's political correctness. Alright, that was appeal to fear. And since it's already long past 5 o'clock, I should actually give you guys some music. Alright, we'll be right back. I'll play some music. Of course, from Poker Face.
I guess as you know, we are Poker Face in the little town of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. We've been doing this sort of thing 10, 11 years or so. Play a lot of political events here and there. And it's just great to have people who are willing to stand up and say, hey, you know what, that and all that, all my neighbors agree with and stuff and don't even bother looking into, that's wrong. And I got a bunch of other people that think the same way, and we're going to make a deal about it. So this is a great little deal we got going here. It's really nice. The song's called America.
America.
Alright, that was Poker Face. I don't know what's up with the sound, guys. I do this like every week. And never was any trouble, but we'll figure it out and see what happens next week. Alright. Let's get back to the fallacies. Next is appeal to flattery. Also known as apple polishing. Description of appeal to flattery. It comes in the following form. 1. Person A is flattered by person B. Person B makes claim X, therefore X is true. The basic idea behind this fallacy is that flattery is presented in the place of evidence for accepting a claim. This sort of reasoning is fallacious because flattery is not in fact evidence for a claim. Do you see how this also falls under appeal to emotion? This is especially clear in a case like this. My Bill, that's a really nice tie. By the way, it's quite clear that 1 plus 1 equals 49. Examples of appeal to flattery. 1. Might I say that this is the best philosophy class I've ever taken? By the way, about those 2 points, I need to get an A. It's also appeal to emotion, right? You flatter somebody, makes them feel good. 2. That was a wonderful joke about AIDS, boss, and I agree with you that the darn liberals are wrecking the country. Now about my raise. Alright. That was a singularly brilliant idea. I have never seen such a clear and eloquent defense of Plato's position. Yeah. Yeah. That must have been something. There is no way you can justify Plato's position. The fracking elitist that he is. It's good that, it's available for everybody now. But the thing is that most people will actually fall for his arguments and see themselves as cattle, right? That they should be governed by philosopher kings because they know better, right? It's really hopeless with this Plato. It makes me sick to read his stuff, It just drips of authoritarianism. This sort of reasoning is fallacious. Oh, I already did that. We were at Plato's position. If you don't mind, I'll base my paper on it, provided that you allow me a little extra time past the deadline to work on it. Well. He's flattering the professor, apparently. And then asking for some more time. Alright, not so difficult, this one. Appeal to novelty is also not so difficult. Appeal, also known as appeal to the new. New is better. Appeal to novelty is a fallacy that occurs when it is assumed that something is better or correct simply because it's new. This sort of reasoning has the following form. 1. X is new. 2. Therefore X is correct or better. I would say X is new. 2. Therefore X is correct or double plus good. That's new speak. This sort of reasoning is fallacious because the novelty or newness of something does not automatically make it correct or better than something older. Another thing that springs to my mind is, yeah, I gotta write this down, feedback, because before I forget it. At the work I do in the nursery, they offer courses. And in one of the first courses that we got, they introduced the term feedback. And they asked us, well, what is that, right? And so I came up with two explanations. One is feedback you can get from Skype, for instance. And another is feedback you can get from people sending me emails. Right? That's also feedback. But no, that's not what was meant with it. It's an English word, and we introduce it into Dutch for some reason. Because the Dutch word kritiek sounds a lot like critic, to be critical of, which is exactly what it means. The Dutch word kritiek, has a kind of negative tone to it. So we should use feedback instead of that. Now that's a very good example of what newspeak is. Alright? This sort of reasoning is fallacious because the novelty or newness of something does not automatically make it correct or better than something older. Right? This also goes the other way around. Just because something is older or an action has been taken in the past so many times, doesn't mean that it's better than something new. Right? So it's also the other way around. This is made quite obvious by the following example. Joe has proposed that 1 and 1 should now be 5. Well, that's new, right? When asked why people should accept it, he says that he just came up with the idea. Since it's newer than 1 and 1 is 2, it must be better. I don't get the examples here. They are a bit too simple, right? This sort of reasoning is appealing for many reasons. First, Western culture includes a very powerful commitment to the notion that new things must be better than old things. Second, the notion of progress, which seems to have come in part from the notion of evolution, implies that newer things will be superior to older things. Right? I've said this before, but the whole word progress is, especially when politicians use it, they speak two languages in some cases, maybe in all cases. I haven't studied it enough to be able to tell, but surely with the word progress, when they mean it in an exoteric way, for the masses of the people, it's the usual idea, things moving forward, right? Oh, that's actually a bad example because that's also a double loaded term. But there you go. And then the other explanation for the word progress, which is also sometimes used as move forward, is the path that we are on to a new world order, right? Third, media advertising often sends the message that newer must be better. Because of these three factors, people often accept that a new thing must be better because it's new. Hence, novelty is a somewhat common fallacy, especially in advertising. It should not be assumed that old things must be better than new things. Appeal to tradition. Any more than it should be assumed that new things are better than old things. The age of a thing does not, in general, have any bearing on its quality or correctness. Obviously, age does have a bearing in some contexts. Yep. For example, if a person concluded that his day-old milk was better than his 2-month-old milk, he would not be committing an appeal to novelty. This is because in such cases the newness of a thing is relevant to its quality. Well, I wouldn't call that new, I would just call it fresh. Right? You guys get this, right? I don't need to do the examples, right? If you do want to hear the examples, you can read them. Just send me an email and I'll send you the link. Email me at solvinur2@yahoo.com. That's SOLVINUR, the number 2@yahoo.com. Next is appeal to pity. Appeal also falls under emotion, right? It's Latin name ad misericordiam. Misery, right? Ad misericordiam. Description. An appeal to pity is a fallacy in which a person substitutes a claim intended to create pity for evidence in an argument. It has a following form. P is presented, which is intended to create pity. 2, therefore claim C is true. This line of reasoning is fallacious because pity does not serve as evidence for a claim. This is extremely clear in the following case. You must accept that 1 and 1 equals 23. After all, I'm dying. While you may pity me because I'm dying, it would hardly make my claim true. This fallacy differs from appeal to consequences of a belief. In this fallacy, a person is using the effects of a belief as a substitute for evidence. In appeal to pity, it is the feelings of pity or sympathy that are substituted for evidence. Right, so there's a distinction there. It must be noted that there are cases in which claims that actually serve as evidence also invoke a feeling of pity. In such cases, the feeling of pity is still not evidence. The following is an example of a case in which a claim evokes pity and also serves as legitimate evidence. Professor says, "You missed the midterm, Bill." And Bill says, "I know. I think you should let me take the makeup." And then Professor says, "Why?" "Well," says Bill, "I was hit by a truck on the way to the midterm. Since I had to go to the emergency room with a broken leg, I think I'm entitled to a makeup." And the professor says, "I'm sorry about the leg, Bill. Of course you can make it up." The above example does not involve a fallacy. While the professor does feel sorry for Bill, she is justified in accepting Bill's claim that he deserves a makeup. After all, getting run over by a truck would be a legitimate excuse for missing a test. Alright, next one. Appeal to popularity. Has the following form. Most people approve of X, brackets open, have favorable emotions towards X. 2, therefore X is true. The basic idea is that a claim is accepted as being true simply because most people are favorably inclined towards the claim. More formally, the fact that most people have favorable emotions associated with the claim is substituted in place of actual evidence for the claim. A person falls prey to this fallacy if he accepts a claim as being true simply because most other people approve of the claim. Alright, so this is a bit like, it's not exactly the same of course, but it's a bit like appeal to authority, right? Just because some authority makes a claim doesn't mean that on the basis of that you would have to accept it. It is clearly fallacious to accept the approval of the majority as evidence for a claim. For example, suppose that a skilled speaker managed to get most people to absolutely love the claim that 1 and 1 is 3. It would still not be rational to accept this claim simply because most people approved of it. Another bad example. After all, mere approval is no substitute for a mathematical proof. At one time, people approved of claims such as the world is flat. Humans cannot survive at speeds greater than 25 miles per hour. The sun evolves around the earth. But all these claims turned out to be false. This sort of reasoning is quite common and can be quite an effective persuasive device, since most humans tend to conform with the views of the majority. Comma, says there, but I'm stopping a little. So that says a lot about us, right? How most people tend to conform with the views of the majority. Why is that? You know, it has to do again with appeal to emotion. Because, you know, people don't want to be left out. They want to belong to the group. Alright. Convincing a person that the majority approves of a claim is often an effective way to get him to accept it. Advertisers often use this tactic when they attempt to sell products by claiming that everyone uses and loves their products. In such cases, they hope that people will accept the purported approval of others as good reasons to buy the product. This fallacy is vaguely similar to such fallacies as appeal to belief and appeal to common practice. However, in the case of an ad populum, which is appeal to popularity, and notice that the word populus is in there, means population. The appeal is the fact that most people approve of a claim. In the case of an appeal to belief, the appeal is to the fact that most people believe a claim. In the case of an appeal to common practice, the appeal is to the fact that many people take the action in question. Right? Doesn't mean that they question the action, but that they do take the action which is presented. This fallacy is closely related to the appeal to emotion fallacy. Yeah, that's what I said. Now, examples of appeal to popularity. I'm going to skip those again. Or this one is not too difficult, right? Appeal to ridicule. Also not so difficult. Also known as appeal to mockery. The appeal to ridicule is a fallacy in which ridicule or mockery is substituted for evidence in an argument. This line of reasoning has the following form. X, which is some form of ridicule, is presented, typically directed at the claim. 2, therefore claim C is false. Right? So I would put this in another form. I would say 1, person A makes claim C, then 2, someone else comes along and ridicules person A, and then 3, therefore C is false. This happens a lot, right? Most of you people will have this thrown at you. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're nuts. You're crazy. You need to get your head checked. Those are all appeals to ridicule, and what they're trying to do with that is make the claim that what you say is false. When Walter lights his ciggy, I challenge you to meet his race with the bong hit or the smoky treat of your personal liking. Yeah. I'm sorry guys, I'm a rabid smoker. I smoke a lot. In Dutch we say I smoke like a ketter. Yeah. I'm just lucky that at my work they even let people smoke now and then. Let's see, where were we? Appeal to ridicule. This sort of reasoning is fallacious because mocking a claim does not show that it is false. Yeah, and this question has been bugging me, and I don't have an answer. This is beside the point, but it's because of the chat room and the whole smoking thing. Do you guys remember from your own investigations about Edward Bernays, right? How he made the torches of freedom as women saw them. And then women started smoking. You all remember that, right? It's culture creation, that's what it's called. So when people like Edward Bernays, who is working for the elite, so to speak, made it so that women also started smoking. This was back in the, 50s or so. How come then that there now is this all-out war against smoking? I bet it's even worse in the United States than it is here. I don't get it. Why? Why, if we all think that, government wants you sick or even dead, then why all this anti-smoking stuff? The only reason, which is a ridiculous reason, I must say myself, this is not a good reason, but the only reason that I can come up with is that it protects you from the fracking chemtrails. That's the only reason I can come up with as to why these people would want us to stop smoking. Because they don't want you to be healthy. They want you to be sick. So there's a contradiction there, see? And I can't figure it out. What's going on here? Let's continue anyway. This is especially clear in the following example. 1 and 1 is 2, says somebody. And then somebody else says, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Alright? Bad example again. It should be noted that showing that a claim is ridiculous through the use of legitimate methods, such as a non-fallacious argument, can make it reasonable to reject the claim. Yeah, that's how, Matty, that's how women saw it, according to this psychoanalyst who was a student of Freud anyway. He said to Bernays that women view them as torches of freedom, but also as phallic symbols. And also that it represented the oppression of men to women, that they didn't allow them to smoke, right? But back to this, because that's really important here, what I wanted to say about this ridiculousness. What will happen if it already has not happened? Probably it has happened to some of you. When you're discussing something with somebody else about, for instance, the New World Order, and you come up with this argument, and then what the other person does, who doesn't believe you, he takes your argument and pulls it into an extreme, thereby making it ridiculous. Right? You got to be very careful of that. If you make an argument and he comes back at you with the same argument but pulled into an extreme, then you must say to him, no, that's not what I said. Listen to what I say. My words mean this and that and not something else. Right? So be wary of that. One form of this line of reasoning is known as reductio ad absurdum, reducing to absurdity. In this sort of argument, the idea is to show that a contradiction or an absurd result follows from a claim. For example, Matty, I think I tried to look at that, but it was, well, how do you call that? My YouTube thingy, it opens up and it says, this content has been blocked due to copyright infringement. Right? The BBC will not allow it to be shown here. Same goes for Empire of the South, for instance, or The Trap. Those are very, very good, well, I should say they are very, very good for beginners, not for us. You know, we could poke holes in there and say that the maker, I don't remember his name at the moment, the maker is clearly not awake. He's making some logical fallacies in the fact that he is not including things that we already know, which would explain why politicians act in such and such a way. He doesn't get that yet. He doesn't, you know, see them as puppets, for instance. So yeah, that's probably a good one. And there's another kind of contradiction that I see. Matty says, the engineering of consent from the BBC. Now you gotta wonder, why would the BBC come up with this? Right? Is this something that, is this a sign of the fact that, no, these elites don't have full 100% control? Because you gotta give it to them. The BBC also came out with the fact that, what was it? 10 or so of the so-called hijackers were still alive? Remember that? And then when the FBI told them to retract it, they wouldn't. They stuck by their story. Now, it could be that this information they want us to know, right? I heard a talk about with Alan Watt, from Alan Watt, where he says that the mainstream media always tries to confuse you. And how do they do that? By posting contradictions before us. You know? Because, and why do the mainstream media do that? It's because he says, if they were to come with a completely logical argument for why things happened, that's when we would start wondering why, what's going on here? There's something going on here, because we are so used to being confused by these people that that's what we expect of them. Century of the Self, Engineering of Consent. Is it the same one? Here, let's see if this works. Century of the Self, Part 2. Yeah, this one actually works. Well, that's good. Maybe I can find Part 1 here also, because it's been a while since I've seen it. Alright, so this is a good video. There are some names in there, for instance, that you could research. But remember that, who is this, the author again of this? Century of the Self. No, I gotta know. It's BBC, but who is the maker? Adam Curtis. Right? If you remember, I had... Jeez, I'm so fracking bad with names. I had James Corbett on, poking some holes in Mr. Adam Curtis's documentaries, because I wouldn't regard him as awake, right? It focuses on the works of Edward Bernays, Anna Freud, and Sigmund Freud, influencing the way corporations and governments have analyzed and dealt with controlled people, right? Culture creation. It was Edward Bernays who said, for instance, that if you have a product and the people don't want to buy it, you don't change the product, no, you change the people so that they want to buy it. You see how these people think? It's fracking insane. Alright, back to the fallacies. Where were we? In this sort of argument, the idea is to show that a contradiction or an absurd result follows from a claim. For example, Bill claims that a member of a minority group cannot be a racist. However, this is absurd. Think about this. White males are a minority in the world. Given Bill's claim, it would follow that no white males could be racist. Yeah. Now he is using a fallacy. Right? What's the fallacy here? I'll try to explain it. The fact is that anybody can be a racist. It has nothing to do with white people. But that's what's being instigated? No. Promoted here. That it's white people who are the racists. And how does he do that? By using the negative. Right? He says, well, it would then follow that no white males could be racist. In other words, he's counting on the fact that people think that whites are racist. Also, this whole racism thing is really bugging me. Examples of appeal to ridicule. Sure, my worthy opponent claims that we should lower tuition, but that's just laughable. Ha ha ha. 2. Support the ERA. I'm not sure what that is. Sure, when the women start playing for the drinks. Well, whatever. 3. Those wacky conservatives. They think a strong military is a key to peace. Alright, so those wacky conservatives, is that an appeal to ridicule? I would say it's an ad hominem. Right? And then, they think a strong military is a key to peace. Well, it's like war is peace, right? Alright, enough of that. Appeal to Spite is the next one, but it's 58, which means my bumper should be kicking in a few. Thanks for listening, Anouk, Dan, Jules, Road, Gold, Tomato. Thanks everybody. I'll be back next week. See you later. Have a nice Independence Day. Bye bye.
The new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of